Hola a todos, bienvenidos otra vez a otra lección. Ya estamos casi al final del capítulo 3 y hoy vamos a hablar acerca de los verbos que terminan en ER y EIR. So ER and IR verbs conjugating in the present tense. En la lección 2, so a few weeks ago, hablamos acerca de la conjugación de los verbos AR, right? We've already talked about AR verb conjugations. Así que ahora vamos a hablar about the two other types of verbs. We said there are three endings in total, AR, ER, and IR. So after this lesson, you'll know how to conjugate the majority of Spanish verbs in the present tense. So, excelente. Let's go. All right, so one great thing is that, first of all, ER and IR verbs are not nearly as common as AR verbs. AR is the biggest category of verbs, and the conjugations are very, very similar between ER and IR verbs. So you have here, for example, the different forms, and you can see that the ending for yo form, the first person singular in both, is just the letter O, just like in the AR verbs. So yo como, yo escribo. The to form for both of them is ES. In the AR verbs, it was AS. In the ER and the IR verbs, it's ES. So tú comes, tú escribes. The third person singular, usted, él, and ella, is just the letter E. In the AR verbs, it was just the letter A. So usted come, él come, ella come, usted escribe, él escribe, ella escribe. The nosotros and vosotras forms are where it gets a little bit different. In the ER, the nosotros form is comemos with EMOS. And in the IR verbs, it's imos, IMOS. So nosotros comemos, nosotras comemos, and nosotros escribimos, nosotras escribimos. And the vosotros form, which, as you know, we're not going to hold you to, is different as well. For the ER verbs, it's eis, EIS, and that's a diphthong. So think that in the AR verbs, it was ice, AIS. In the ER, it's ace. And that's again, the vowels are all making their names. They're all making their sounds. Ace, ace. So vosotros coméis, vosotras coméis. In the IR form, it's just IS. Vosotros escribís, vosotras escribís. And then back to the third person plural, it's the same for both of them, just the EN. Ustedes comen, ellos comen, ellas comen. Ustedes escriben, ellos escriben, ellas escriben. So again, the forms for ER and IR are the same in the first person. On the singular side, they're all the same. And on the third person side, they're different in nosotros and vosotros, and back to the same in the third person plural. So let's go through the verbs for ER. I'll have you repitan after me. Yo como. Yo como. Tú comes. Tú comes. Usted come. Él come. Ella come. Nosotros comemos. Nosotras comemos. Vosotros coméis. Vosotras coméis. Ustedes comen. Ellos comen. Ellas comen. Ahora el verbo escribir, IR verb, escribir. Yo escribo. Yo escribo. Tú escribes. Tú escribes. Usted escribe. Él escribe. Ella escribe. Nosotros escribimos. Nosotros escribimos. Vosotros escribís. Vosotras escribís. Ustedes escriben. Ellos escriben. Y ellas escriben. Okay? So you're going to memorize just these endings, again, that are very similar to the AR endings, and you'll be able to conjugate most ER and IR verbs in the present tense. Here's my favorite, the way that helps me to look at it. Again, you can see how similar they are. The singular side is the same for both ER and IR. The plural side, the first person plural, nosotros form differs, hemos versus imos. Second person plural form, the vosotros form differs, eis versus is, and then back to the same again in the third person plural. Okay, so just a summary again for however you learn, whichever is easiest for you. Just like the AR verbs, the ER and IR end in O for the first person singular. And except for the yo form, the verbs for ER end in E. And then in the IR verbs, they end in E as well, okay? So here you have a couple different ways of looking at learning the conjugations for these ER and IR verbs. Now, aquí es una lista de verbos, de vocabulario that you're going to want to learn. And I'm going to go through these. I'm going to pronounce them, and you'll repeat after me so that you can hear them pronounced, and then I'll give you some tips about some of the verbs. Clase, aprender. To learn, aprender. Beber, to drink. Comer, to eat. Comprender, to understand. Correr, to run. Creer, to believe. Deber, to should, to must, to ought to. Leer, to read. Now some IR verbs. Abrir, to open. Asistir, to attend. Compartir, to share. Decidir, to decide. Describir, to describe. Escribir, to write. Recibir, receive. Vivir, to live. Okay, so starting from the left side on the ER verbs again, just some tips. Aprender, to learn, comes from the same Latin root as an apprentice. So an apprentice is somebody who's learning something. That may be a way to help you learn that. Comer, we already talked about to eat. Comprender looks like to comprehend, right? So that's an easy one. Creer, you'll see that creer has the preposition en. We say, I believe in ghosts. Yo creo en las fantasmas, los fantasmas. So it's often followed by the preposition en. Now, if you say, I believe that what you told me is true, that's not the same thing as I believe in. So if you're saying I believe in, the preposition en follows the verb creer. And I skipped back up to the top with aprender. When we talked about when you have two verbs together, typically you don't conjugate the second verb, you leave it in the infinitive form. And with aprender, it's the same thing, but we do include the preposition a. So yo aprendo a hablar español. Aprendo a estudiar. I learn to speak Spanish. I learn to study. Even though that second verb in the infinitive form means to learn or to study or to speak, we use a preposition a with the verb aprender. Second to the bottom on the ER verb, deber, is a kind of a strange, it's really a helping verb. To should, to must, to ought to. We don't really consider that to be a separate verb in English, but it is in Spanish. And again, it's often used with the infinitive. So debo estudiar la lección, right? I should study the lesson. No puedo ir a la fiesta porque debo leer el libro. I can't go to the party porque debo leer el libro. I can't go to the party because I must or I should, I ought to read the book. And leer, it was a little bit different in that one because we have two E's together. And so you can hear it's not leer, it's leer. If you can hear that, if you can think of it with two little emphasis on the two E's. When we conjugate it, yo leo, just L-E-O. Tú lees, again, two E's together. Usted, él, ella, lee. Nosotros leemos. Vosotros leéis. Y ustedes, ellos leen. So because you take out that ER, you still have an LE together. So you're adding those endings onto an existing E for many of those. So you just kind of give both E's a little bit of attention. The IR verbs, abrir, asistir a, means to attend. It looks like assist, like to help, and that's a false cognate. That's not what it means. But you say, yo asisto a la Universidad de Idaho State. I attend Idaho State University. Asisto a la clase de español los lunes y los miércoles. So I attend, and the preposition a that follows it. And then decidir is another very common one to put with two verbs together, the second one being the infinitive. So decido estudiar español. Decido trabajar mañana. So the second verb again stays in the infinitive, and there's not a preposition that the verb or the word a, for example, does not follow that one. Okay, so let's do a couple things here. Again, number your papers. We're going to go through 8 examples of each of those verbs. So make 3 columns or number your papers 1 through 8, and a couple different forms here for ER, IR, and IR verbs. And I gave you 3 examples here. So I want you to conjugate the corresponding verb in its form according to those ones. And so pause here, go through, do that, then come back, and we'll go through the answers, and we'll practice some pronunciation. Ok, así que primero tenemos el verbo correr. Ahí está la respuesta número 1, Graciela corre. Clases repitan, Graciela corre. Número 2, tú corres. Clases repitan, tú corres. Número 3, yo corro. Clase yo corro. Número 4, Sara y Ana corren. That's an ellas form, right? So third person plural. Clase Sara y Ana corren. Número 5, usted corre. Número 6, ustedes corren. Número 7, la gente corre. La gente means the people, which you might think it's a plural group, but the word itself is singular. It's la gente, so it's a singular entity. Número 8, Marcos y yo corremos. Okay? Para el verbo abrir. Ellos abren la puerta. Third person plural. Número 2, Carolina abre la maleta. Número 3, yo abro las ventanas. Número 4, nosotros abrimos los libros. Número 5, usted abre el cuaderno. Número 6, tú abres la ventana. Número 7, ustedes abren las maletas. Número 8, los muchachos abren los cuadernos. Ahora para el verbo aprender. Número 1, él aprende español. Número 2, Maribel y yo aprendemos inglés. ER verb, aprendemos. Número 3, tú aprendes japonés. Número 4, tú y tu hermanastra aprenden francés. Número 5, mi hijo aprende chino. Número 6, yo aprendo alemán. Número 7, usted aprende inglés. Número 8, nosotros aprendemos italiano. Okay, if there's some you didn't get right, then just pause and review it. Make sure you remember that the ER and the IR form are very, very similar. For our purposes, it's just that nosotros form, that first person plural form, where the IR verbs have an IMOS and the ER verbs have EMOS. Okay, ahora some práctica, some practice. This is a conversation that Juan is talking about what he and his friends do after school. So you're going to number your papers from 1 through 6 and write these sentences out, and we'll come back and talk about them. This is a familiar format because you've had this on quizzes and exams, and you will continue to do so. So let me give you some tips. The words that are between the slashes are the words that you have to use, a form of those words. You can change the words. In fact, many times you have to change the words. You've got to conjugate that verb. And then you need to add what other elements are necessary to make your sentence make sense. There are no articles in here. There are no prepositions in here, and some of these sentences are going to require you to come up with those. So don't just use the words that are there. Make sentences of your own using this as your base. There's not one set answer. There are many different forms of each of these questions, which is why on the quizzes and exams, I go back and check them all by hand as well. So the modelo, yo correr, amigos, lunes y miércoles. So a correct sentence would be yo corro con mis amigos los lunes y miércoles. I run with my friends on Mondays and Wednesdays. So you have to conjugate that verb that's the infinitive form. You have to add the conjunction con. You have to add the the possessive article is mis. You have to add the articles los, right, to make that sentence make sense, but you use all of the elements that are in the sentence. So number your papers 1 through 6, write me 6 sentences, come back, and I'll give you some examples of the first sentence that came to me as I did this, okay? Okay, muy bien. Número 1, we have Manuela, asistir, clase, yoga. Un ejemplo, Manuela asiste a la clase de yoga. Remember, asistir means to attend, and it has to have the preposition a follows it. Número 2, Eugenio abrir correo electrónico. So email, electric mail. Un ejemplo, Eugenio abre su correo electrónico. Número 3, Isabel y yo leer biblioteca. Isabel y yo leemos en la biblioteca. You could have acerca de la biblioteca. Isabel and I read about the library. That'd be another example, but you have to add the proper parts of speech, or in that case, the prepositions. Número 4, Sofía y Roberto aprender a hablar inglés. Un ejemplo, Sofía y Roberto aprenden a hablar inglés. Okay? Aprender to learn. When it comes with another infinitive, the preposition a for to is needed there. Número 5, tú comer cafetería universidad. Un ejemplo, tú comes en la cafetería de la universidad. Número 6, mi novia y yo compartir libro de historia. Mi novia y yo compartimos el libro de historia. You could say un libro de historia. You could say dos libros de historia. But you're using all those components and you're making sentences that make sense. Okay, muy bien. Ahora, this is one more práctica. The model is, and you'll hear this one has recording with it, but you're going to answer all these sentences in the negative. Remember that in Spanish, when we answer no, we have to have a double negative. No, I don't go to the store. You can't just say, no, I go to the store. That is not the correct way of responding to these sentences. So double negative, okay? So escuchen, number your papers 1 through 8, and you're going to answer these questions in the negative.
3. Preguntas. Answer each question you hear in the negative. Repeat the correct response after the speaker. Modelo. ¿Viven ellos en una residencia estudiantil?
No, ellos no viven en una residencia estudiantil.
1. ¿Abres las ventanas?
No, yo no abro las ventanas.
2. ¿Comen tus amigos en la cafetería hoy?
No, mis amigos no comen en la cafetería hoy.
3. ¿Viven ustedes en el Ecuador?
No, nosotros no vivimos en el Ecuador.
4. ¿Corre Sara mañana?
No, Sara no corre mañana.
5. ¿Recibes muchas cartas?
No, yo no recibo muchas cartas.
6. ¿Debe comprar él un diccionario?
No, él no debe comprar un diccionario.
7. ¿Aprenden ustedes inglés en la clase?
No, nosotros no aprendemos inglés en la clase.
8. ¿Leen los estudiantes la lección 4?
No, los estudiantes no leen la lección 4.
Muy bien. So this is just a great review of so many different concepts that we talked about in the last several weeks. You're listening to verbs, you're understanding what the person's asking you, you're turning it around, turning the subject to reflect the proper person or people being talked to or about. You're conjugating the verb correctly, you got the double negatives in there. So excellent. I hope that went well for you. If not, again, review it. Pause, go back, look at the parts you missed if you're having a hard time conjugating the verb, if you're having a hard time understanding what's being asked or putting it back on yourself. Let me know how I can help. Hope this has been good for you. So you can, at this point now, you can conjugate the majority of the verbs in the present tense in Spanish, which is huge. There'll be a couple exceptions, a couple of atypical ones, irregular ones that we'll go over here as we go through the class. But good job. Let me know what kind of questions you have and how I can help.